Welcome to hashtag Webinar Wednesday. My name is Doug Sesserman, and I'm privileged to serve as the CEO of Americans for Ben-Gurion University. It is noon Eastern Time in my virtual office in New York City and 7 p.m. in Israel. We are streaming live on Facebook, and today's webinar is called for 30 minutes. This is actually our 52nd webinar, and the fifth time we featured Professor Guy Ben-Porat, one of our brilliant faculty members at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, and someone I consider a very good friend. This makes him our most sought after webinar speaker, which may have something to do with his brilliance, but also the political situation in Israel that just seems so dynamic and always so interesting. I also want to thank Lenore Levine, Leora Miller, and Kara Bortman behind the scenes in our office for everything they did to curate this webinar. Today, we will be learning about Israel's new government, what it means for the future of Israel's democracy, and how all of this may impact American Jewry. As I mentioned, we are joined by Professor Guy Ben-Porat, one of Israel's leading political experts and the immediate past chair of the Department of Politics and Government at BGU. But before we get started, I want to mention a few of our upcoming events. Tomorrow, actually, we'll be co-hosting a webinar with Chavarut Shalom of Southwest Florida that features Professor Ido Bar-Zeev, speaking about Israel is leading the way in water renewal. We're also partnering with the Academy of Jewish Religion on February 23rd that will feature Professor Simon Barak and Rabbi Bruce Alpert, who will discuss what do Judaism and science have in common. Our in-person 2023 midwinter meeting is coming up in Houston, Texas, scheduled for February 26th to the 28th, and it's also the kickoff of the 20th Gourmet Kosher Extravaganza, which is an event you won't want to miss on Sunday, February 26th, if you find yourself in Houston. And lastly, our next national webinar will be Tuesday, March 14th, where Professor Oren Sur will discuss anti-Semitism and technology, including how hate speech can be detected on social networks and in online discourse. For all of this information and future details on upcoming events, just go to our website, americansforbgu.org. And today, I know there's going to be questions. So if you have a question, you just click on the Q&A function, and I'll do my best to feed these questions to Guy. Okay, now we're going to get going. Professor Guy Ben-Porat, as I mentioned, is the immediate past chair of the Department of Politics and Government at BGU. His expertise in comparative politics and public policy. He is the co-author of Policing Citizens, Minority Policy in Israel, and the author of several other books, including Between State and Synagogue, the Secularization of Contemporary Israel, which was an award-winning book in many, many different ways. Professor Guy Ben-Porat received his BA in Political Science and Psychology from Tel Aviv University and his PhD in Politics from Johns Hopkins here in the US. Professor Ben-Porat is also, and this is very important, the founding director of BGU's new program for shared society, focusing on the academic study of Israel's deep divide between the Jewish majority and Arab minority, and the challenges of balancing its dual commitments to be both a Jewish and democratic state. I don't think we could have a better speaker. So with that, Guy, let's just start talking. Why don't you tell us a little bit, just remind us how we found ourselves in this situation, and how is it possible that Benjamin Netanyahu has found himself as the most liberal person potentially in his coalition?
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, everyone. I've been doing this for several times now, and I usually try to be very reserved and professional and be objective. I think we're in a different situation now. I find myself in recent weeks concerned and angry. Let me start by something personal. I was born and raised here. That's my home. I don't have another passport. I'm going nowhere. I have a job here. My younger daughter just finished her army service. I did my service years ago in a combat unit, and then about 20 more years in reserve duty. I did tours in Lebanon, West Bank, Gaza, even when I did not agree with the government, because I thought, this is how democracy works. And you win some, you lose some, and that's the way the game is played. So before we go to what's going on, I think we need to talk about the why. And this is a coalition that is made of three parts, one more concerning than the other. We have a prime minister leading a party, a prime minister who is under investigation for different crimes, under trial. This has been going for several years now, and this coalition, among other things, is seen to be meant to bring him out of his legal troubles. For this, he has partnered with three other parties, actually. One party is an extreme right-wing nationalist party. May I remind you that part of this party is made of the ex-Kahana group, who were ostracized for years. Leader of this party, Itamar Ben-Gurion, one of the leaders of the party, is an ex-Kahana disciple. He had on his wall a picture of Baruch Goldstein, the one responsible for a massacre of 30 worshippers in Hebron. And now we've made him the minister of the police. That's how things are. It's a party that is ready to sacrifice everyone for his messianic zealotry. And the other two parties are Orthodox parties who have their own qualms here. While they are partnering a right-wing coalition, they're making sure that their own sons and daughters don't serve in the military. So that's the point where we are now. It's a coalition that is bound together with a very strong sense of mission, which I think is a grave concern to Israel's democracy. So how we got here is an election where the other side has made many mistakes. The other side has come together very strongly. Netanyahu, in order to be a prime minister, legitimized, as I said, the extreme right wing. At the moment, they're strong in power with 64 seats in parliament, which is a comfortable sitting because it's a very stable and united coalition. That's where we are at the moment.
Wow. Not exactly what to say. There's already Q&A starting to build up. The first questions just being asked by Phyllis Lessons. Thank you for joining us, Phyllis. She's asking, will Israel be able to keep its status as the only democracy in the Middle East?
I wish I could be more positive. I want to say yes. I think there are still people here fighting for that exactly.
Maybe let's go back a second and maybe define democracy, because there was an election in a democratic state,
right?
And
I think as both the scientists,
the party system is different than in the U.S., and so it takes a coalition for the prime minister to be to power. So just remind people, I mean, even if this is not a democratic outcome, it was a democratic process that led to this.
No, it is a democratic outcome. I mean, this was a fair election competition where different parties compete for power. There's 120 seats in the parliament, and you need to form a majority in order to rule. So the Likud party and the two ultra-Orthodox parties and one right-wing party combined 64 seats, which is enough to put Netanyahu in power. The question is, what is now? And now they are planning different reforms, which is, if you take each one separately, you might say, well, there might be some sense in this and that. But I think the major reform aimed at is against Supreme Court. Let me explain. When we talk about democracy, we often talk about separation of powers, checks and balances.
Yeah, this is very important. I didn't mean to interrupt while I'm interrupting, but this is a very important point because the powers of the judicial system, it's different in Israel in terms of checks and balances versus the U.S.
Yes and no. Let me try and explain. So in Israel, the checks and balances are weaker than in other democracies. For a starter, we don't have a constitution. So there's nothing that holds things together. Then essentially, the government and the parliament are pretty much the same. So we don't elect a president separately, then we elect the Congress. So government and parliament are the same. The government has full control of the parliament. So what is balancing government is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has been under attack for many years for being elitist, too liberal, and not elected by the people. There's a very complex process, which is a committee made by judges, by existing judges, by politicians, and by members of the Lawyers Association. Together, they elect judges. Now, judges have been, in many cases, from elitist positions in society, which has made them a target of criticism, and for a good reason. At the moment, the reform is about three things, or four things. One is to change the way judges are elected, and to allow politicians more power in electing the judges, the magistrates. Second is to disallow the Supreme Court to overrule legislation of the Knesset. Third is to limit the intervention of the courts in other manners, by what's called the reasonability clause. So the Supreme Court could outrule decisions by government officials on account of reasonability. It's unreasonable. They want to limit that too. And fourth, they also want to try and limit the power of the legal consulates of the different branches of the government. So essentially, everything together means more power to politicians and less checks and balances on those politicians. Now, as we know who these politicians are, then we have a good reason to be worried.
Okay, thank you, Guy. The questions are pouring in, so let me try to get to some of these. And thank you all in the audience for participating. We had almost 300 registrants, and a lot of you are here with us. So I'm not going to be able to get to all of these. Louis Reinstein, who is one of our Zen fellows in Florida, is asking, how do we get around the fact that people elect the government or enough parties to create the government? If everyone who has protested in the past few months actually voted together, do you believe we would have a different government?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Again, I think
he's asking if the people that protested had been more unified in their votes.
Oh, absolutely,
yes. Different place as it relates to the coalition.
I think the center left has made grave mistakes in the elections. One of the major parties has not crossed the threshold, so they're not in the parliament. Other parties have made other mistakes, a lack of leadership. I mean, we can regret that for a very long time, but absolutely, if the center left has been better organized, the election might have been different. While the number of seats is 64 to 56, the popular vote is much narrower. It's about 30,000 difference, I think, in favor of the right wing. So in terms of organization, lack of organization, absolutely grave mistake.
Okay, so Gary Kalmek is asking, Israel seemed to be more liberal in the 90s, but has been trending further and further right until we got to this point now. He's asking, do you believe if there could be a more united liberal left-wing movement in the future that's coming out of this? And if so, do you believe they could have a chance of getting into power down the road?
I think we're seeing in past weeks people that in recent years have been very quiet politically. I think this government, with this onslaught on many different issues of life, has brought out of the closet many people that thought that this can pass by. You see people working in the high-tech sector who are protesting, economists writing letters and making petitions against the government. Many people that before that were indifferent, are now becoming more and more involved. I think what this protest is lacking is two things. First, it is still unable to convince people on the periphery, people on the margins, people who are less wealthy, that they also have a stake in what's happening now, and they tend to support government or be indifferent. And Arab citizens are still not part of this movement, and I think the blanket is a bit short. So every time you push it, something is left out in the cold. So I think it's the difficulty of the center left to create a coherent coalition or compromise that will bring together more people under that tent. Yes, and I think that will be the main test case in the next weeks.
Okay, we keep getting more questions, so thank you, audience. One of our board members, Michael Ozer, is pointing out that recently Adam Fisher, I think it was yesterday, who's a venture capitalist, wrote a piece in the J-Post pointing out how the current government could pose a real threat to the high-tech sector and other economic impacts in Israel. Could you just comment on that?
Well, this has been also coming up here. I mean, we had last week a demonstration. People from the high tech came out to demonstrate, which is something that's very unusual. We had a letter of 300 senior economists of Israel also expressing their concern, making a connection, which is valid at some point, between democracy and economic growth, freedom and economic growth. But I think there's also a, I would say, a moral issue here, or a political issue here, where many of the high-tech center belong to the liberal, left-wing, more secular, and I think this government is a threat on their life, and some of them might decide to move. You know, they're very agile, so they can move elsewhere. So I think in that sense, there is a danger, but I mean, from my own perspective, I think that my main battle here is moral. It's political. I mean, the economy is a good point, but I don't want to make that into a, if we are more or less rich or poor, is that the main issue? I think the main issue is, what country do we want to live in? What morals we want to abide by? And how will Israel look in the next 2, 3, 4 decades? What are we leaving for our children? I think that's the main question I want to put up here.
We're getting a really good question from an anonymous attendee that's saying, so if the current elected government has come about from a democratic process, which it did, what has changed in terms of the underlying population and demographic groups that's driving this more right-wing coalition?
I think there are two things, and both deserve a longer debate than what we have here. I think one is that what's been changing in the past decade, that the ultra-Orthodox parties, who for many years were ambivalent towards other issues other than their own concerns, mainly the Israeli-Arab conflict, have made a strong alliance with Netanyahu and the right wing. So the ultra-Orthodox have become right wing, and there's a paradox here, because many of them, as I said, do not serve in the military, but still they will join a right wing coalition, and they're being very moving apart from previous coalitions with the center-left parties. That's one. Second issue, I think, and that I think you can see that also in the US, the fear of violence and crime, which the right has been very well organized to capitalize upon. So we had here in last May, in many cities, we had clashes between Arabs and Jews. We have rising crime rates, part of it responsible by the Arab citizens who are also poor, so that's also another explanation. And I think many of Ben-Gurion's supporters have been voting out of fear. So it's not necessarily a right-wing, racist, anti-Arab. It could be people who fear and believe that maybe the right wing will be not so soft on crime, as you say in the US, and be able to solve their problems. I believe this is, of course, a grave mistake, but I can try and understand what's happening here. So I think for the center-left to return to power, these issues will have to be somehow addressed.
Okay, the questions keep pouring in, Guy, and I know we're starting to run out of time and we need to talk about American Jewry. But this one comes from Benjamin Diamant, who's also one of our Zinn fellows. And for those who don't know, that's a program we run to engage the next generation in our work here at Americans for Ben-Gurion University and the University in Israel. He's actually asking a really good and making a really good point. He's saying, doesn't it ring hollow to claim that a democratically elected government is a threat to democracy? He's saying, isn't the real threat to democracy the failure to accept the results of a democratic election?
No, again, I think we need to separate between the process and the content of democracy. So people can be elected democratically, but then through the majority do things which are undemocratic. So being elected is one thing, what you do while elected is another thing. So democracy is also about the protection of minority rights, also about individual rights. So an elected majority can be undemocratic. So the process, yes, I said the process was democratic. There is no question. They were elected by a fair election in which they won. However, what we're seeing now is an onslaught on the democratic institutions, the court, the police. Almost every minister now has new reforms. It's going to restrict rights of women, LGBT, people who are not Orthodox. And I think all these things are also a part of democracy, of liberal democracy. And Israel has always had the trouble, as Doug said in the beginning, of balancing the commitment to a Jewish state and to a democracy. But I think now we have gone very far into a Jewish state and less into a democracy. So from my perspective, as an Israeli who lives here, my right to live as a secular person, a liberal person, and again, I'm not in threat because I'm straight, white, whatever, Jewish, but I think the democracy is measured also by the way it treats the vulnerable, minorities, people who have different opinions. And in that sense, I think that the election outcomes are very threatening.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, we're getting two questions, and I hope the audience can hang on there a little bit longer. This webinar is probably going to go another 5 or 10 minutes past the half hour. But we're getting similar questions from Ellen Meyer and Alex Sisileski. They're both asking about the two-state solution, which hasn't really been on the platform, if you will, for some time. But is it fair to assume from these results that there's really no plan right now for a two-state solution?
Oh, no, far from that. I mean, there's no, this is for the moment dead. And I'm not sure what the future holds for that. But this government is committed to building more settlements and to preventing any possibility of a two-state solution. And here's another paradox. I mean, you think, what is the solution then? So I always tell my students that one thing that we need to remember, that nobody's going anywhere. Arabs, Jews, Palestinians, we're all staying here. So if Israel is going to de facto annex the territories and annex another 2, 3, 4 million Palestinians, and it's going to hold them without political rights, then I have a good friend, Arian Naor, who used to be a Likud member, who said that he grew up as a child on 3 things: on the greater Israel, on a democratic state, and then a Jewish state. And as he grew up, he realized he could only have 2 out of the 3.
Right.
So a greater Israel, which annexes the West Bank and does not give people their political rights, it will be hard to claim it's a democracy. So I think in that sense, it's another danger looming out there. Yes.
Yeah, I had a tour guide once on one of my many visits explain that Israel has a trilemma. People are familiar with the dilemma. You can have one thing and not the other. But in Israel, it's a trilemma. You can have all of the land, which is greater Israel, including the territories that were gained past the '67 war. You can have its nature as a Jewish state and also its nature as a democratic state. But you have to pick 2 of those 3. You can't have all 3.
Yeah.
So if there's no path to a two-state solution, then its democratic nature is at risk. Okay, so let's shift now to what this all means for American Jewry. based on your knowledge and the diaspora relationship with Israel. So take a shot at answering that.
Yeah, well, I think that Netanyahu has made a choice several years ago, which is to forego the relationship with American liberal Jews in favor of Republican Party, evangelicals, and the ultra-Orthodox in the US. And you can see that in the way that this government is treating Reform Jews and conservative Jews in Israel. So I think in that sense, there's a grave danger of a break between Israel and American liberal Jewry. And I have many friends in the US, I study in the US, I visit the US, and I was on campus at University of Brown University a few years ago, and this was very clear by young American Jews that kind of becoming more and more detached from Israel. If you're a liberal American Jew and you look at Israel, which is becoming less and less liberal and more Orthodox Jewish or whatever, then it's very difficult to relate to that. My hope is that at some point we can establish a cross-Atlantic dialogue between American Jews and liberal Jews in Israel. I think there is much talk about how Jewishness should look in the 21st century and what values it holds. And maybe we can try and redefine together what it means to be Jewish on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think there's a lot to speak about here. I'm not sure we should leave the stage for the Orthodox and the right wing. I mean, but then that's a very personal statement of my own. But my feeling is that at this point, there are two options. One is a detachment, and I think it's a possibility, and you know more than I do. But the other is a dialogue and cooperation, which I'm hoping we can establish I think it's for the sake of both sides.
Yeah, I mean, what I've been feeling a little bit is on one hand, yeah, there could be a detachment. On the other hand, there could be a doubling down of our efforts to, love Israel, even though we may not like all the time what's going on. And to some degree, that's where we believe Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, that's what it represents. It represents 21st century Zionism. It's about education and world-leading breakthrough research. It's about developing the Negev, which is 60% of the land and still today less than 10% of the population. And David Ben-Gurion, our founder and first prime minister, as we know, once said the future would emerge from the Negev. So maybe it's time for us to get busy, really busy, building the country south. So also just comment, because I don't want the audience to be depressed. This is one of Ben-Gurion's quotes that I love the most is that the test of democracy is the freedom of its criticism. So the fact that we're even having this webinar and there are these protests tell us how robust the democracy actually is. But people have different points of view, and right now the ruling point of view is different. There was an article written that said, described American Jewry more as like a blue state and Israel as a red state. Do you think that that's a fair assessment?
Again, can you repeat that?
There was an article that was written that described American Jewry, mostly liberal Jewry, as a blue state, but Israel today as a red state. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, if you judge by the government, absolutely. But if you want to stay on the optimistic side, I think right now we are fighting for democracy, for maintaining democracy, for having a real democracy, not just a formal one. And I think if we're joining hands together, and where there's a fight, there's a hope, I think. So as I said, I'm not going anywhere. I mean, I'm staying here. I mean, that's my home, and I have my values, and I'm part of this place. And in that sense, there's no option, but to fight for democracy. I think this is a really concerning and bad time. But if there is some glimpse of optimism, is that people are coming out and people are understanding what the stakes are, and hopefully this will be overcome.
So we're getting a really good question on what do you believe American Jewry can do to foster more pluralistic Israel?
Well, I think it's, to support people of Israel that share your values and opinions. I mean, support in different ways. I mean, establish a dialogue. If you're donating money, I mean, there are enough good causes here that need your support. Also, I think that it will be a good idea to send the message to the American government who they should support in Israel. I mean, I think that again, I'm being very political today, so I'm taking off the gloves in some matter. But there was an Arizona, I think it was a Nevada senator who is coming on a delegation to Israel, who declared she will not meet with Itamar Ben-Gvir and with Bezalel Smotrich. I wrote her a letter and said I thank her for that. I think that's a good idea. I think that we need again to talk straight and say no. These people who are racists and who are chauvinistic and who are homophobic are not part of this dialogue. I mean, not my dialogue.
Okay, we're getting a great question about your Center for Shared Society. So tell us what you're trying to accomplish with this center and what you need to from us to be more successful. What resources would you require?
Well, the idea for this center was to take like ideas that are philosophical and political and also turn them into a policy agenda. So, as I said several times, nobody's going anywhere. We're living here together, religious and secular, and Arabs and Jews. And we need to come to terms with how to do this in a way that everyone can accommodate everyone. And I think we need knowledge, how to run hospitals, how to run schools, how to run academia in a way that provides people with a safe space for dialogue, that can provide people with the services they need, and can help people advance. And I think at the moment we're lacking. I mean, I think we need more knowledge and more places to make these dialogues. So my work is on policing. And when I look at the Israeli police, and I've been studying it for the past 10 years, so police has trouble with Arab citizens, but also with Ethiopians and with Russian immigrants and with ultra-Orthodox. I think part of what's missing here is good knowledge on both sides on how to work. And without policing, there's nothing. There's no security, there's no economy. So that's just one way that I think that we need to work together. And I think these are problems that are also common to other countries. So this is not an Israeli problem. Like,
and how unique would this center be? Are there some of the other universities studying the same topic?
I think there are different. There are different centers that do similar things. I think this has a unique leverage point of being multidisciplinary, of trying to connect philosophical, political, and policy sciences and policy manners. And I think in that sense, there's an important idea here that could be developed and be beneficial. I hope so, at least.
Okay, we're going to try to close now. First with one more question from Alan Friedman, and then just a closing comment from you, Guy. Alan is asking, what factors would cause this government to fail or succeed?
I'm not sure what you mean by success, but I think what this government is facing now is opposition from within, and there is demonstrations and quite large ones and action. There are, I think, sectors that came up now and are surprising the government. I think, again, the letter from 300 economists, senior economists, who are writing against this policy. And of course, we have other sectors, the high tech and academics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing. Also, I think that the international pressure is also important here. I think this government should be told once and again that keeping Israel a democracy, maintaining rights for all people, for minorities, LGBT, women, etc., is essential. So I think this outside pressure is also important. And I hope this government will fail. I mean, at least its reforms will fail, and then we are off to a better future. So I hope, at least.
Okay, the national anthem is Hatikva, which means hope. Why don't you close with a hopeful comment? And by the way, appreciate totally the candor of your presentation today.
So first, thank you for listening. I think I've been less articulate than before, but that's when you mix opinions, emotions, and facts that happens sometimes. I think again that this is a democratically elected government. I think Israel had a democratic process. I think democracy does not end here. I think democracy relies upon checks and balances, upon rights for individuals, rights for minorities, pluralism, and all these things are in grave danger. And I think for very wrong reasons. We are fighting. I have hope that at least some of these things will be curbed. I'm hoping for support from other people abroad and here. And I'm encouraging you, all of you, to maintain this dialogue. I mean, if you hold these opinions, the people in Israel will hold the same opinions. I think, again, this cross-Atlantic dialogue is essential for Israel. I hope it's also important for American Jews.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Guy Ben-Porat, for joining us once again for our 50-second webinar. What does this new government in Israel mean for its democracy, and what does all that mean for American Jewry? So we could keep talking for hours. We may need to bring you back again, but I really want to thank the audience who came in big numbers, and for all the people that asked questions. For those questions that didn't get answered, we'll make an effort to get you those answers. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's founder and first prime minister, and the guy I call sometimes number 2 Jew all time, once said that in Israel, in order to be a realist, you have to believe in miracles. And I think we need to right now just believe in the miracle of democracy and what we're seeing in the streets and the protests, and also the reality of democratically elected government and a coalition that's been built. And you may not agree with everything, or you may agree with everything, but this is all part of the miracle of what is democracy. So thank you very much for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about our events or get involved, just go to our website, americansforbgu.org, and we'd love to connect you in any way possible. We also are trying to really be partners with other organizations, as I mentioned at the beginning, doing webinars and bringing in scientists and faculty members like Guy and others to talk to your synagogue or your church or your pro-Israel organization. We're happy to work with you. So just get in touch with me directly or any of our field staff. You can find a way to get to us. Together, we truly believe that we can be partners in the remarkable, which is the modern state of Israel. Okay, thank you very much, Guy. Lahitro, and I hope to see you soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.